Hey folks, Quill18 here, and welcome to another tutorial for Unity, where we work on a base building game as part of Project Porcupine. At this point, we do have a tile map system that generates and has visuals, and it's done in a relatively efficient manner. It uses some cool combat mechanics, and despite the fact that we have 10,000 tiles right now, the game is running pretty quick, which is nice to see. A couple of things we're going to adjust in this episode, and we're going to work on mouse interaction, so that we can start sort of painting tiles and know what tile our mouse is over. I don't like the fact that all the tiles here, the visual tiles, just get dumped in the hierarchy. We're going to have them moved to the world controller as a sort of a child there. Also, I did go and make a pass through the source code over here to add in some more comments and actually clean up some of these properties as well, just to make the code a little bit more, just a bit neater where we can. If you're following along, you want to make sure you've got exactly the same source code version as I do. If you check the description box down below, you should be able to download the source code files, and there should be a snapshot there for every episode. So if you find the one that's listed for episode 3, the previous episode, it should bring you up to date to exactly what I've got over here, assuming everything is set up correctly. So, first thing, I want to do is move it so that all those tile visual objects get stuffed inside of World Controller as a child. That way our hierarchy stays a little bit neater, and that's very easy to do. Right over here, after we create our object here, what we can do, and set it to its position, I mean, it doesn't really matter what order we do it in, except for reasons, we can just say tile.go.transform.setParent. And then we tell it the parent, which is, say, our own transform. And I'll make it explicit. This, oops, nice autocomplete there. This dot transform like that. Now, we can give it a Boolean after that to say whether it should stay in its current world position or not. And it should. We're happy with its world position right now. Now, one of the things here is it will end up with some weird coordinates for our children objects, and we'll look at why that is in a second. So now if I hit this, and we look at tile 0, 0, tile 0, 0 should be at position 0, 0 in the world. And it is, except its transform over here gives us some really weird coordinates. Why is that? Well, it's because the world controller itself is not at the 0, 0 mark in the world. So if you look here, tile 0, 0 is the exact inverse of the world controller. So tile 0, 0 is at the 0, 0 position in the world, but it's offset relative to its parent because its parent isn't at the 0 coordinate. And just to keep things tidier and just nicer, it'll be a lot better if the world controller is set to 0, 0, and then everything will work out exactly what you might expect, right? Tile 0, 0 is at position 0, 0. 0, 1 is at 0, 1, and so on and so forth. Excellent. And then we can collapse this over here, and it keeps our hierarchy nice and neat. Like that very much. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that when you mouse over a tile, we're going to start off by mousing over a tile. We're going to have a little icon, just a little doohickey indicating that we are sort of hovering over a particular tile. Just to give you a little bit of visual feedback. It's going to look good, and it'll help later on when we start to select some of those tiles. I made a nice little graphic for it. I've got my cursor circle graphic that I've made here. If we look at the sprite editor, it's literally just sort of a transparent image that's got this sort of black circle, and then I've got a white circle sort of inlined, right? So as opposed to being outlined, it's inline. You can invert it, but you really do want to do this when you do sort of a selection circle, or if you're doing like a crosshair, you want to use both dark and light colors, because this way it'll show up whether you're on a light background or a dark background, right? If I've got this on top of a completely black background and it was just the black lines, you wouldn't be able to see it. So always use this kind of combination. This is also really good if you're doing subtitles or something like that on a video. You want to use text that is white outlined in black, or the other way around. So there we go. So we're going to have that, and our goal will be, let's go ahead and create a little bit of an empty here and add a sprite renderer on top of that and give it the circle cursor. And then if we just zoom in over here, we are going to want to have this thing basically on top of whatever tile our mouse is over. We're going to make a little bit of an adjustment to our graphics over here, and you're actually going to be able to see the effect quite clearly as I make these changes. For one, we're not going to have it compressed. We're going to set it to true color. That's actually not going to matter with this. We could probably leave this one compressed. The big one for this one will be to have no point filtering. There we go. And I'll do the mint maps turned off as well, because we won't need them. For this one, I guess the compression doesn't matter too much. Some sort of drawn graphics like this and tiles will get quite muddy if they're compressed. Here, I guess it doesn't matter, so I'll leave it compressed, but there we go. So we're going to have that, and then the other thing we want to do is we want to change the pixels per unit. I made this graphic 32 by 32. which the size of this image doesn't really matter, but what's important is I want this to correctly overlay directly on top of a tile. So I'm going to really want it to be one world unit big. So I'm just going to tell it that, hey, 32 pixels makes exactly 1 unit, and that should make this bigger. And when we get it on top of a tile, it should line up nicely. And actually, we can see right here the effect of, see the outline, right? If it was just pure black, you wouldn't see it over here. And then as I move over here, these are relatively light colors in some of these bits, so you might not be able to see the white properly. But with the black outline, it should look fine. So we'll see how that goes. Obviously, it's not the world's greatest little selection graphic, but it will work out. Now, when we did our tile visuals here, right? When we play and we've got our visual tiles, I had these game objects generated programmatically. For this one here, I think I'm going to use this as a prefab. Let's go ahead and use, I don't know, call it cursor circle, just arbitrarily, that's fine. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and make it a prefab. We're going to do, I don't know, new folder, UI, sort of, I guess. Let's just call it that, and then we're going to stick it in there and see how it goes. I'll probably reorganize this folder structure about 30 times before we go forward, but there we go. And then I'll just get rid of the instance in there. So we've got that. Now, we need some sort of mouse manager. Now, and I say that because here's the thing. You've got a couple of different ways you can implement mouse stuff in the game, right? So what I want is when I mouse over this tile, I want to have that circle cursor sort of show up there. And then later, I want to be able to click and drag. The idea is like I'm going to be painting multiple floor tiles down, for example. And I'm actually going to want every single one of these tiles to be highlighted by that little cursor circle. So what I could do, you could put a bunch of logic where each one of these little tiles, these visual tile game objects, could have a script on there. And I guess they would also need... they might need some sort of collider component, and you could run a bunch. That might not need a collider, but you could, in your script, you could do on mouse enter, on mouse leave stuff. But again, two things. First thing is I'm trying to avoid having a bunch of scripts running on each one of these tiles, because again, right now we have 10,000 of them, and if we add a script to all 10,000 of these tiles, that's adding a hell of a lot of overhead. Just considering the fact that the script exists in memory adds a lot of overhead, and then if each one of those is checking to see where the mouse is every frame, obviously that can get pretty intense. And then the other thing is for things like dragging across multiple tiles, we need something that's sort of aware globally of what's going on with the mouse, not just what's happening to the mouse over a single tile, and then what happens when we're switching from, say, building mode to deletion mode. And maybe we're not in one of those modes at all. We're in just sort of like mouse over mode so that we can, you know, see things with a tooltip. And what happens when a UI window is open on top of this? We want to be able to sort of disable the normal mouse selection and interaction behaviors at that point. So all of that points to me to having a centralized mouse management script that will handle all that rather than have anything on the tiles themselves. And the thing is, having mouse management on individual objects in Unity is a very common thing to do when you're just starting out, and especially when you're working with smaller programs. It's very easy to do, to just sort of add it directly. But I have found time and time and time again that as a program grows, having the mouse behavior be on individual objects tends to be a trap. You tend to have much more success if instead you have a centralized sort of mouse manager. And so instead of an object being aware of, hey, this mouse is over me, so maybe I should do something, instead you have the mouse manager doing a raycast and saying, all right, what's the mouse over right now? Okay, it's over these things. What am I going to do with that based on what mode I'm currently in? So that's what we're going to do here. So I'm actually going to create a new empty object in here, and I'm going to call it, I guess I'll call it mouse controller, just, you know, for a certain amount of, you know, similarity here. Now, this mouse controller doesn't really have to be its own game object. It's actually quite common for me to do something like create an empty, call it something like scripts or something like that, and all these sort of like global management scripts just added on there. But I think we might end up with a few of them, and it might be nice to have them isolated on separate game objects. Tiny bit of extra overhead by having separate game objects, but what the hell, right? But if I'm going to create a new say a new controller over here. A mouse controller, it's not really a controller in the MVC model, but for our purposes, I think it's going to be fine, right? But there's no reason I couldn't add this mouse controller to, say, world controller. It makes no difference one way or the other, but it might keep our project more organized. We'll see how it goes. All right, so we got a new controller. We've added it on here. We're going to double click on it to load this bad boy up. And what are we going to do with it? Well, really, what it's going to do is every frame, it is going to move our little icon-y thing, depending on if we're over a tile or not. And I guess with that in mind, what we could do, actually, you know what? Before we start this, let's add the ability to scroll and move the camera around, rather, right? So what does it mean to move the camera around in our project? Well, so here's our view right now. Here's our main camera. What we'd like is, see, in the Unity scene, and let's copy it, why not, right? Left click selects things. And if you hold down the middle mouse button, then you can pan around by default. And let's copy that. Let's go ahead and do that. So in here, what I would like is when I hold down the middle mouse button and I move around and drag, that the camera over here moves with me, right? That's what I would like to do. So how are we going to arrange that? That's not too difficult to do. Inside of our update, so every single frame, we're going to have mouse controller check to see if we're dragging the middle mouse around. Easy peasy. There's a couple of different ways that games do dragging behavior. Sometimes they'll do it where it's almost sort of like a rubber band, right? Where you click and you pull, and then, like, if I click here and then I drag this way, as long as I leave my mouse here, it's going to continuously move in that direction. I guess that's less rubber bandy and more you're just sort of setting a speed. And if I drag and I move the mouse over here, then the screen will continue moving very quickly. In here, what we've got is wherever we click, the mouse sort of like anchors itself and then moves around. That's fine. And some games will also do it. If you hold down the middle mouse button here, it'll actually instantly center the view there. And then as you move, it'll almost keep your mouse centered and then move around. And some will sort of invert the drag. Like some of them, they're thinking of it in terms of moving the camera, and other they're thinking of it in terms of moving the world. Like for example, in Unity here, it's thought of I'm grabbing the world and then moving it, right? If I'm moving down and to the left, I'm sliding the table down and to the left. Whereas really what the camera is doing, all that's happening here is the camera is moving up and to the right. The camera is moving opposite of what's going on there. And so in this particular implementation, what we do is we sort of cache the coordinates that the mouse is when you first clicked, and then every frame as the mouse moves, you just check the difference between the mouse in the last frame and the mouse in the current frame, and then you just move the world that much. And that's the implementation we're going to take. So yeah, it's not about caching where the mouse was when you started your drag. You're just tracking where was the mouse last frame, for example. So, okay, right away that sort of tells us something. We want to know where the mouse was last frame. So, okay, vector 3, last frame position. Right? That's pretty fair, I suppose. So how is our behavior going to be? Basically, we're going to have an if here. If input dot mouse button. So what we've talked about before, there's get mouse button, and then there's get mouse button down and up. Get mouse button down and up tell you if the mouse button was pushed down or released since the last frame. That's all it is. It doesn't tell you if a mouse button is being held down. It just tells you if the button has been pushed, for example. So in here, though, what we want is, I think we want a continuous thing. We want to be able to say, is the mouse button currently down? And then it needs an integer here for the button. 0 is the left mouse button, 1 is the right mouse button, and 2 should be your middle mouse button, which is what we're going to use for this. Honestly, I would probably go and map maybe a couple of buttons. I might do like middle and right mouse button. Actually, let's go ahead and do that. Because you know what? Some people might be on laptops without a convenient middle mouse button. So let's do something like this. So right or middle mouse button. Either one you can use to pan the view around. Sure, that seems pretty fine. And then we'll open up our little if statement here. So what are we going to do? We just want to know how far we moved from our position in the last frame. That's it. So obviously, we need to, at some point, capture where we were in the last frame. So let's do that at the end of the update over here. Last frame position of the mouse is equal to, well, it's kind of a little tricky because we can go input.mouse position, right? That's the mouse position. Let's just save that. It's a vector. It's very convenient. Now, the gotcha is that mouse position here is the position of the mouse in screen space, which is to say, when you're running your game, you look at your screen window over here, and it's telling you where the mouse is in this little window, not in the world. And I think it's the bottom left corner is 0, 0, and I think the top right, I think for this it might just return like a 0 through 1, or it might be returning the number of pixels. I actually don't recall for this one. It doesn't matter. You don't tend to use it directly most of the time because it's not terribly important. You want to know, you're going to want to transform it into world coordinates, generally speaking. So this is not really what we want to use. Now, certainly I could still cache that here and then do some transformations on this, but we may as well do the transformation right away. So we want to know, instead of the mouse position on the screen, we want to know the mouse position in the world. Is that difficult to get? Not at all. There's a couple of different ways to get it, but specifically you actually have to ask a camera to do a transformation, because what you're going to do is you're going to tell a camera, listen camera, my mouse is currently right in the middle of the screen, right at this little position right over here. Camera, can you tell me what the coordinate of this spot in the middle of the screen is in the world? Because the camera knows where it is, where it's facing, and so on and so forth, and can tell us that information. So it's very easy to do. We just need a reference to the camera. And we do have a main camera. You can go camera.main, and then you can do stuff with this, okay? Now, this is a very handy shortcut, but sometimes it won't work. And why is that? People will get confused. Usually, you'll see that happen if for some reason you deleted the camera and then you add it back in, which we can totally do, right? I can take this camera, I can delete it, right? Scene is missing a camera. Okay, so we go game object, camera, we add it back in. Now we've got a camera in our scene again. It's currently not facing in the right direction, but that's okay. But if we do this, at this point, camera.main will actually be a null and will throw an error when we try to do this. And why is it? Camera.main, to me, intuitively, it might do something like grab the first camera in the scene, but it doesn't do that. It actually, what it does is it grabs the first thing that is tagged as main camera. And if you create a new camera, by default, it'll come in as being untagged. So it needs to be tagged as main camera for camera.main to work. I'm going to go ahead and undo, and put the camera back just so that I've got all the right settings for my orthographic camera over here. You can see this one is tagged as main camera. So for now, this shortcut will work. Depending on what we do later on, maybe we're going to want to have like a reference to the camera, right? Something like public game object, my camera, and then we're going to want to assign that in inspector. But for now, we can do this way, and it's going to be fine. Okay, so this has got a couple of different ways to transform coordinates, and in particular, it's got one called screen to world point right over here, which works great for us. This will turn a coordinate on the screen into a point in the world. Now, this will work exceptionally well with an orthographic camera, which is what we're working. So if I do this, now the mouse position is now a point in the world. So when I'm running the game and I mouse over right here, right in the middle of the screen, right now, assuming, and I'm pretty sure that's true, the mouse position goes from 0 to 1 and 0 to 1. Right now, the mouse position would be 0.5, 0.5, but once I transform it to the world coordinates, this should come out to 0, 0, because this is my origin point, and the center of this tile right here should be exactly 0, 0 in the world. So that's great. Now, if you were doing this with a 3D camera, right now this is a 2D world, and what we're specifically using is our main camera is orthographic. And if I go into my my scene view over here and I turn off the 2D mode right from this little toolbar, so now we can interact with the Unity space in 3D, you can see our camera, again, this is our camera projection here. It just comes out as a big giant rectangle. It's orthographic. It has no perspective. Now, I can change this camera to be a perspective view. And then we've got this sort of, what do you call it, the frustum, right? That comes out like this. So you get perspective so that things that are further away look smaller. This is your standard sort of 3D camera. It's not the sort of thing you generally want to work with when you're working with 2D graphics. But if you were using this in 3D with a perspective camera, it's very important to note that what that command does, this screen to world point that transforms the mouse, gives you a coordinate that is on this little plane over here. You can't really see it. If I increase the clipping view to like 1 over here, there we go. You see this? This is the near clipping plane. This that screen to world point will give you a coordinate on this plane over here, which may not be what you're looking for, which is why, generally speaking, when you're working in 3D, you actually have to do a raycast from your camera forward and then see the point at which it hits the thing you're interested in to actually get your real world coordinates. Luckily, in orthographic view, let me change the clipping plane back to point 3, while I'm still getting a coordinate over here, right? This is the near clipping plane in this case. I'm getting, and when I'm transferring the mouse coordinates from screen space to world space, I'm getting a coordinate on this near clipping plane, which is not here, it's here. But since I'm only working in 2D, the fact is that things line up perfectly in this direction, which you can't really see because I was in perspective view there, but it lines up perfectly over here. As long as I ignore the Z component, if I'm working in 2D space, if I ignore the Z component, then this should give me the correct coordinates, right? Last frame position, there we go. So we're going to cache that. So here we are in dragging mode, right? We've got the middle or the right mouse button down. Every frame, we're grabbing what our last position will be, or was. So what we want to do here is we just want to move the camera based on the difference where the mouse is now and where the mouse was last frame. So that's pretty easy. So let's make a temporary thing. We're going to call it diff for the difference. And we're going to say something like the difference between the last frame's position and the current frame, which is the same thing over here. In fact, if I didn't want to run this transformation twice, I could go and make a variable here. In fact, I probably will need to use this quite often in here. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to do something like vector3 cur frame position. And we're going to put it in there. And then we can get rid of this superfluous call over here. So last frame position minus current frame position. We're going to do that, which is great. And then we're just going to move the camera by that much. So camera.main.transform.translate, and we're going to tell it to move by the difference. And then we may have gotten it backwards. We'll see. Oh, I got to stop the program running and then start it up again. So let me just move that over like this. So what happens? I hold down the middle mouse button, and then things are starting to go a little wonky. They're flashing back and forth. Pretty standard for me to do it wrong, but that's actually... I think I know what's going on here. I think it's because we're doing this. No, and then the world... Why is it blinking back and forth? This frame is current frame. See, because if I'm not moving it, nothing should be happening. And it's not. And then I jiggle it a little. It's interesting that in the inspector, it's reporting everything as being totally fine. There's something I'm missing. There's something I'm forgetting. What is it? Well, tell you what. Let's do a quick little... let's do some debugs. All right, debug.log. There's something that I'm missing that's right in front of my face, and I'm not thinking about it. So there's a good way to find out. Let's just debug some output. So I'm going to be debugging the difference every frame. So if I just hold it down now, it should be 0, 0, because I'm not moving it. So let's move it a little bit over here. Yeah, see, it's alternating back and forth, which to me is saying this last frame position is... I wonder if after I move the camera, if I shouldn't capture the most up-to-date version of this position. Yeah, there we go. Much better. I'm still having a sort of a hard time placing it in my head, exactly what's going on. But after we move the camera, we're then going to update the mouse position. Right, because of the way the mouse moves. Ah, that makes sense. There we go. So that way, when the frame update ends, it does correctly say where the mouse is in world space relative to the current camera position. All right, so there we go, clear as mud. So we do have to run this twice just in case there is a move, but otherwise we're okay. A little bit of redundancy, but not that much. And again, I probably will use the current frame position quite often, and so it'll be handy to have it in a variable. Tiny bit more memory by having a variable, but it's not really terribly significant to instantiate that. So that's good. Okay, middle mouse and right mouse button both work to pan this around. Great. So now next step is I want so that when I'm over a tile, I want to put that little cursor circle on there just as an initial test. So how are we going to get that going? For now, let me go ahead and drop the cursor circle inside of the game world. And then we're going to grab a reference to it. We're going to say game object, public game object, circle cursor. We aren't going to use this going forward. We're going to change the implementation later on, but this will allow us to start testing and to sort some things out, which will be nice. So in here, yeah, we're doing some dragging and stuff. That's great. We're going to keep that in, and we're going to do, handle mouse or screen dragging, right? That's going to be good. But then before that, we're going to say update the circle cursor position. So there's a couple of things we can do to cheat. So what we want is, and if I take this and I just make sure it's set to 0, 0, and we hit play, this should be on the first tile. And it is. I hit play again and end up with a floor tile there. There we go. I was kind of hoping that would happen. It is now invisible. You can't actually see it. And why is it? Well, it's because they're both at exactly the same coordinates. This first tile, the 0, 0 tile, right, is at a Z of 0. And our cursor circle is as well. If I take this Z and bring it negative, which brings it closer to the camera based on our camera direction and everything like that, now it's in front of this tile. So what we could do is force this circle cursor to always have a slightly negative Z, so that's in front of things. But then the problem will come later on when we've got like objects and doors and people walking around. We're gonna have to keep track of various Z levels and see what the correct one is to make sure that everything is, showing in the order we want. That's kind of a stupid and hacky way to control things when there's actually a much, much, much better way to organize this. In the 2D sprite renderer system, there's something called sorting layers. And this determines what order the 2D graphics get drawn in. And this is independent of the Z order. So if I create a new layer over here, and I call it something like, we're going to have a lot of these layers. This is something like, basically like tile UI stuff. It's kind of a UI element that's going to exist on tiles. And mostly it'll just be these cursor circles. And we're going to have it like this. And we can reorder these. I can say this tile UI should always be behind the default, but no, I want to have it lower down in the list. We'll actually put it, I believe, in front. I might be wrong. We're going to find out in just a second. So on our cursor circle, I'm going to want to set its default, its sorting layer to tile UI. I'm going to apply that so that it also gets updated into my prefab over here. So now let's hit play. And let's hit play again so that we get a tile in that spot. And try it again. Okay. So much for trial and error. Let's just go ahead and move it. There we go. And even though its Z is exactly 0, it still shows up in front of stuff. And even if I set the Z to positive, where it will definitely be behind this tile, if I switch over into the 3D view, I can actually see that quite explicitly. There you go. You can see my 3D, my little circle is clearly behind the tile. And despite that, it's still visible because of these sorting layers, which is great. So this way, I don't have to mess around with the Z index, which honestly, in a 2D application, I'm much more comfortable not messing with the Z because it's sort of counterintuitive and doesn't make sense. Use sorting layers. That's what they're there for. And even within a layer, you can change the order of things within that layer by changing these numbers. But mostly we should be able to get away with the just the sorting layer by itself. Okay, so that's good. Now all we have to do is update the position. So our mouse controller, we're going to give it a reference to our instance of our cursor circle. And we're not pointing to a prefab, we're just pointing to the one that's in the inspector. And so right over here, we're just going to, what's going to be very simple. We are going to tell the circle cursor that its position, or transform.position, should be equal to the world position of the mouse. Right? Okay, so that's step one. Let's do that. And hit play. And what does that look like? I was like, why is it not visible? Well, there's a reason for that. The mouse, as I told you, is getting positioned in such a way that it is, its Z is aligned with the camera, right? The camera plane. So that our circle cursor, and this will be obvious here if I run it here, look at it, it's it is aligned with the plane of the camera, which shouldn't be a problem in a 2D program, except that there's this near clipping plane right over here, clipping plane near. Anything that's closer to the camera than 0.3 units away simply will not get rendered, and our cursor circle is at -10, the Z, which is exactly the same as the camera, which is why it's not being rendered. So what we really want to do is we want to like make it so that the mouse position, we want to set it to a 0, or we want to set it 0 here or something like that. I think what I'll do is after I grab the mouse position and stuff it in the vector 3, I'm going to explicitly set the Z to 0. And last frame position, I'll also have to do that as well. So that way when I do the difference between the two of them here, the camera's not constantly moving 10 units away every frame, which would be awkward. So we're going to force the Z to be 0. And now I think if we hit play, all right, we're going to have the circle follow the mouse, which is exactly what we asked for, but isn't what we're looking for, because we're not wanting to like replace the mouse circle with the mouse cursor with a circle. That's not what we're looking for. I want it so that whatever tile I'm on, this little circle sort of snaps to the middle of it, just to give you an easy identifier. As you like sort of cross from one of these boundaries to another, the circle just moves over there, just to really give you a good sense of what you're on top of. And this is going to become much more relevant later when we do the drag stuff. So we're going to have to look at how to adjust that, and also how to do like multi-tile selection in the next video. Thanks for watching, folks. See you next time. Hey, thanks for watching, and thank you everyone who supports this channel via Patreon funding. You make it so that I'm able to dedicate more time towards creating more content for this channel and to continue our game programming tutorials. If you want to help support the channel, please go over to patreon.com/Quill18creates and support us today. Thank you very much.